Marcus had $11 left in the world. Not $11 in his bank account. $11 in his pocket. That was all of it. Everything he had. He had already decided what he was going to do with it. A small meal from the diner on 5th Street. Something warm. Something to get him through one more night before he figured out what came next. He never got to eat it, because on the way home, sitting against a cold brick wall, was a woman he had never seen before. No coat, no bag, no sign asking for help. Just silence and hunger written across her face. Marcus stopped. He didn't know that this single moment, this one decision, made in the freezing dark with almost nothing left to give, was about to unravel everything he thought he understood, about loss, about kindness, and about second chances. He had no idea who she really was, and 3 weeks later, a knock on his door would change the rest of his life. 6 months earlier, Marcus Whitfield had a life most people would call ordinary, not extraordinary, not remarkable, just steady. He managed the maintenance department at a mid-sized hotel downtown. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was honest, and it paid the bills, and it let him keep a small apartment with a window that looked out over the parking lot instead of the skyline. He didn't mind. He had never needed much. Marcus was 34 years old, quiet, the kind of man who remembered your name after meeting you once, who held doors, who tipped more than he could really afford, because he still remembered what it felt like to count change at a register. He hadn't always had it easy. His mother had raised him alone in a 2-bedroom apartment above a laundromat, working double shifts as a nurse's aide. There were nights they ate crackers and butter for dinner and called it a treat. Marcus never forgot those nights. They shaped something in him. A soft place, a place that still ached whenever he saw someone struggling the way his mother once had. So when the hotel closed its west wing for renovations and cut half the maintenance staff, Marcus told himself it would be fine. He was good at his job. Surely something else would come along. It didn't. 3 months of applications. 3 months of interviews that led nowhere. 3 months of savings draining slowly, then quickly, the way water disappears faster once the drain is finally uncovered. By the 4th month, Marcus had sold his car. By the 5th month, he had sold almost everything else worth selling. His television, his guitar, the watch his mother gave him for his 21st birthday. He kept telling himself it was temporary, just until the next paycheck, just until something turned around. But nothing turned around. And now, on a cold Tuesday night in November, Marcus stood outside a small diner with $11 in his pocket, and the growing, quiet fear that he did not know how he was going to pay rent in 9 days. He had learned to carry that fear silently. Most people who knew him had no idea how close to the edge he was standing. That was the thing about struggling quietly. Nobody claps for you. Nobody notices. You just keep walking, keep smiling at the right moments, and hope no one asks the question you don't know how to answer. The diner smelled like warm bread and coffee, and for a moment, Marcus allowed himself to imagine sitting down at the counter and ordering whatever he wanted. Just for one night, just to remember what that used to feel like. He ordered a small container of soup and a roll instead. $4.50. He would save the rest. Walking home, the streets were nearly empty. The cold had chased most people indoors. Marcus pulled his coat tighter and walked faster, thinking about the phone call he needed to make to his landlord, rehearsing the words in his head, trying to make "I need a little more time" sound like something other than defeat. That was when he saw her. She was sitting against the brick wall outside a shuttered flower shop, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped around herself. She had no coat, no bag beside her, no cardboard sign, nothing that marked her as someone asking for help, just a woman, maybe in her 60s, sitting very still in the cold. Marcus almost walked past her. He told himself later that he almost did, that there was a version of that night where he kept walking, climbed the stairs to his apartment, and ate his soup alone, and none of what happened afterward would have happened at all. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the stillness in her eyes. Maybe it was the memory of his mother, standing at a stove with almost nothing in the cupboard, still finding a way to make a meal feel like enough. Or maybe it was simpler than that. Maybe he just recognized what hunger looked like, because he had lived close enough to it himself. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "are you all right?" She looked up at him. Her eyes were tired, but there was something sharp behind them too, something that didn't quite match the rest of her. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was calm, steady, not the voice of someone asking for pity, just resting. Marcus crouched down, holding the small paper bag with his soup inside. "Have you eaten today?" A pause, just long enough to answer the question without words. "I'm fine," she said again. Marcus looked down at the bag in his hands. $4.50, the only warm meal he had bought himself in 3 days. Tomorrow he would have $6.50 left, and 9 days until rent was due, and no plan at all for how to close that gap. He held the bag out to her anyway. "Please," he said, "take this." The woman looked at the bag, then at him, studying his face, the way someone studies a stranger. They're trying to understand. "You need this more than you're letting on," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. Marcus almost laughed, almost cried if he was honest. Instead, he just shook his head. "You need it tonight," he said. "I'll figure out tomorrow." For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she reached out and took the bag from his hands. "Thank you," she said. Her eyes held his a moment longer than felt ordinary. "What's your name?" "Marcus." She nodded, like she was memorizing it. "I'm Eleanor," she said. Marcus offered a small smile, stood, and turned to walk home. He didn't look back. If he had, he might have noticed the way she watched him go. Not like a stranger grateful for a meal, but like someone who had just witnessed something she'd been searching for a very long time. He walked home hungry that night. He didn't mind. He had no idea that Eleanor was not who she appeared to be. He had no idea that this one small act, a bag of soup, a moment of decency on a freezing street, was about to reach backward into her life and forward into his, in ways he could not possibly imagine. The days after felt like most days had for months. Marcus sent out more applications. He answered his landlord's calls with careful, practiced calm. He ate less, and told himself it was fine, and tried not to think too far ahead. He thought about Eleanor sometimes, the calm in her voice, the way she had studied him, like she was trying to solve something. He wondered if she was all right. He walked past the flower shop a few times over the following week, but she was never there again. Eventually, he stopped looking. Life had a way of demanding your attention elsewhere. 9 days after their encounter, his landlord agreed to give him 1 more week. Marcus thanked him, hung up the phone, and sat alone in his apartment, doing the math in his head, over and over, hoping it would somehow come out different the 5th time than it had the first 4. It didn't. He had started to consider, quietly, painfully, whether he would need to move back in with his mother, a woman now in her 60s, living on a fixed income, who had already given him everything she had when he was a child. The thought of asking her for help felt like failure wearing his own face. He didn't sleep well that week. He kept thinking about the bag of soup, the way Eleanor had looked at him, and wondering, in a quiet, half-formed way he didn't examine too closely, whether kindness was something the world still kept track of, or whether it simply disappeared into the cold like breath in winter air. He told himself it didn't matter either way. He hadn't given her that meal expecting anything back. That was true. It was also, as it turned out, not the end of the story. 3 weeks after that night outside the flower shop, there was a knock at Marcus's door on a Saturday morning. He wasn't expecting anyone. He almost didn't answer, assuming it was another notice, another bill, another small reminder of everything closing in around him. When he opened the door, a woman he didn't recognize stood in the hallway. She was maybe in her 40s, dressed simply but carefully, holding a manila envelope against her chest like it mattered, "Are you Marcus Whitfield?" she asked. Marcus nodded slowly, unsure whether to feel worried or curious. "My name is Renata Cole," the woman said. "I was Eleanor Hastings' attorney." The word "was" landed heavier than the rest of the sentence. Marcus felt something tighten in his chest. "Eleanor," he repeated. "Is she—" "She passed away 11 days ago," Renata said gently, peacefully. She had been sick for some time. Cancer. She knew her time was limited. Marcus stood in the doorway, unsure what to say, unsure why any of this involved him. He had known Eleanor for the length of a single conversation, on a cold sidewalk weeks ago. "I don't understand," he said quietly. "I barely knew her." Renata studied him for a moment, the way someone studies a person before they hand them something that will change the shape of their life. "She knew you," Renata said. "Better than you think. May I come in?" Marcus made 2 cups of coffee he could not really afford, and sat across from Renata at his small kitchen table, waiting. Eleanor Hastings, Renata began, was the co-owner, along with her late husband Walter, of Hastings & Cole, a small chain of family diners across the city. You've probably eaten at one without realizing it. 7 locations, built from nothing, over almost 40 years. Marcus blinked. The woman on the street was one of the wealthiest women in this city, Renata said, and also, by the time you met her, one of the loneliest. She explained it slowly, giving Marcus time to absorb each piece. Walter Hastings had died 2 years earlier. He and Eleanor had built their business on a simple idea, that a warm meal and a moment of decency could hold a person together on their hardest day. Walter never turned away someone who was hungry, even in the diner's leanest years. It was the one rule that never changed, no matter how the business grew. When Walter died, something in Eleanor changed. She began giving pieces of the business away to loyal managers. She began withdrawing from the life she had built. And then, after her own diagnosis 6 months later, she began doing something no one around her fully understood. She started dressing plainly, sitting on street corners, in doorways, outside shuttered shops, in different neighborhoods across the city. Not because she needed money, because she wanted to know, before she died, whether the kind of decency Walter had built his life around still existed in the world, or whether it had quietly disappeared, the way so many things do when no one is watching. She called it her last research project, Renata said, a small, sad smile crossing her face. She sat outside for hours, sometimes days, in different parts of the city. Most people walked past her without a glance. A few gave her money without ever looking at her face. But every so often, she paused. Every so often someone stopped. Someone saw her. Not the version of her sitting on the sidewalk, but her. A person cold and tired and hungry. You were one of 4 people out of hundreds who did that. Marcus sat very still, his coffee going cold in front of him. "She told me about you the same night she met you," Renata continued. "She said there was a man who gave her his last meal without asking her a single question about why she needed it. She said you looked like someone who understood what it meant to have very little, and gave anyway." Marcus's throat tightened. He thought about the bag of soup. $4.50. The only warm meal he'd bought himself in 3 days. "I didn't know who she was," he said quietly. "I would have done the same thing for anyone." "I know," Renata said. "That's exactly why she chose you." Renata slid the manila envelope across the table. "She wrote this herself, near the end," she said. "She asked me to deliver it in person, and only after you'd heard everything I just told you." Marcus opened it with hands that were not entirely steady. Inside was a single handwritten letter. "Marcus, by the time you read this, I will be gone, and I hope that does not frighten you. I have made peace with it in a way I never expected to. I want you to know something. That night, when you handed me your food, I had already decided that if one more person walked past me without stopping, I would let go of a hope I had been holding on to since Walter died. the hope that the world still had people like him in it. You stopped. You didn't ask me why I was there. You didn't look at me like a problem to solve or a stranger to fear. You looked at me like a person who was cold and hungry, and you gave me the only thing you had left to give. I asked around after that night, carefully, quietly. I learned about your job loss. I learned about the meal you had bought yourself with the very last of your money, and how you gave it away without a second thought. Walter used to say that the truest measure of a person is not what they do when they have plenty. It is what they do when they have almost nothing, and give anyway. I am leaving you the 5th Street location of Hastings & Cole, along with enough to keep it running for its first year. Not as charity, Marcus. As a continuation, Walter's rule stays the same. Anyone who is hungry eats, no questions asked. I believe you already understand why that matters. Thank you for giving me back something I thought I had lost. With gratitude, Eleanor. Marcus read the letter twice, then a third time. His hands were shaking by the end. I can't accept this, he said quietly, more to himself than to Renata. I gave her a $4 meal. This is exactly what she wanted, Renata said gently. She didn't measure it in dollars, Marcus. Neither should you. Marcus stood in the doorway of the 5th Street diner 3 weeks later, the same diner where he had bought his last $4.50 of soup on the night everything changed. It was strange, standing on the other side of the counter now, strange and heavy, and something close to sacred. He didn't take over the diner the way a man takes over a prize. He took it over the way a man carries something fragile that was handed to him by someone who trusted him to keep it whole. The first thing he did, before the first customer walked through the door, was write a small sign and place it near the register. If you are hungry and cannot pay, please sit down. This has always been true here, and it always will be. It was Walter's rule. It was Eleanor's wish, and now it was Marcus's promise. Over the following months, Marcus changed in ways that were quiet, but unmistakable to anyone who had known him before. He started noticing people the way he used to notice them as a boy, before years of struggling had worn some of that noticing away. The man sleeping near the bus stop, the young mother counting coins at the register, the elderly woman who came in every Thursday and ordered the smallest thing on the menu because it was all she could afford, even though she clearly wanted more. Marcus began quietly paying for that woman's full meal every week, without ever telling her. He never forgot the version of himself who had $11 and a fear he carried silently. He made sure that fear never went unanswered in his diner, not for anyone who walked through the door. He never saw Eleanor again, of course, but some evenings, closing up after the last customer had gone, he would stand behind the counter for a moment in the quiet and think about a cold night on a street corner and a bag of soup that cost $4.50 and changed the rest of his life. Marcus never planned to change anyone's life that night. He was simply a man with almost nothing, choosing to give the little he had to someone who seemed to have even less. He didn't know her name meant something. He didn't know she was watching, testing, hoping. He didn't know that somewhere behind her tired eyes was a woman searching for proof that the world her husband believed in still existed. He just saw someone who was cold, and he stopped. That is the part of this story worth remembering. We rarely know who is truly standing in front of us. The stranger on the sidewalk, the quiet co-worker, the tired face in line ahead of us at the store. We cannot see their history, their grief, their reasons for the silence they carry, but we can choose, in that one small moment, to see them at all. Because sometimes the people we barely notice are carrying stories we cannot imagine. And sometimes a meal that costs $4.50 is never really about the food at all. Every encounter has a story, and some change lives forever. The Untold Encounter